What's up, you lazy, entitled, basement-dwelling millennials, bootstrapping boomers, apathetic Xers, and goddamn Gen Z kids today? You know what? My golf swing is definitely probably not better than yours, honestly.
No, I'm actually into golf this summer, and I've been like 3 or 4 times, which isn't saying much for July, but it's been rainy.
It has been raining a lot. Yeah, we're planning on trying to go out in the boat this weekend, and I don't think that's going to happen.
No, probably not. It's just that kind of summer, which is good. I mean, we needed.
We needed the rain. It was just it could have came a little bit over the winter, and then
yeah, it would have been nice to get a little bit of
spread
snow
out
this winter.
a little bit during the summer.
Right,
but,
wouldn't have to worry about flash floods as much.
it's-
Just a small thing like that. No big deal, really.
Global warming isn't real, though.
No, it's certainly not, obviously. But we're here today to talk about the recent presidential debates and Supreme Court fucking around.
Yeah.
And I don't think they're going to find out.
No, they never find out. They have literally designed the system so they are incapable of finding out.
Right,
They have exclusively gotten the fuck around without the find out phase of fuck around and find out, and it's frustrating.
It's a little unfair, like we all could use a little bit more fuck around time in our lives.
Yeah, or a little less find out time,
Right.
or they could use a little more find out time. That would be great because if they had more find out time, we would have more fuck around time.
It's true. It's true.
But instead, we've got to spend all of this goddamn time worrying about what they're fucking around on that we're gonna have to find out on, which is really that's all they did was they just transferred the find out phase of fucking
To
around
us.
onto that. That's trickle down. I finally figured out trickle down. They fuck around and the find out trickles down. That's makes so much sense now.
I mean, shit's always rolled downhill, but this is I like this way too.
All right. Yeah, so I guess we should just start with the debate. Which was I brought a case of beer to watch it at a watch party with some DFLers, and that was not enough beer. It was not enough. I was still very sober and very depressed at the end of that debate.
Yeah, and depressed not because of the beer, because of the show. Wow, I don't really know like a great way to describe it other than just probably the worst presidential.
I do know a great way to describe it because I've seen it in a meme. You've seen Grumpy Old Men, right?
Yeah.
And there's the one part where they get into an argument. He's like, "What?" And he's like, "Huh?" He's like, "What?" And he's like, "Huh?" And they're just going back and forth like that, yelling at each other, like mad at each other, but they can't even remember what for. It was an excellent summary of the debate.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, just one guy can hardly make a sentence, put together a full sentence, and then the other guy can't finish a sentence without lying or mischaracterizing the truth so much that it's like just you can't hear it and be like, yeah, that totally seems possible.
And also can't put together really a coherent sentence
or just a response. You can't respond to a single question, at least attempt to respond to the question that's being asked, and then provide an answer that's even conjecturally related.
Yeah, do you still defend the people on January 6th? Well, if you look back at January 6th, we had a perfect country. Everything in the world was perfect on January 6th. And if you look at the migrants coming across, they're sending their rapists. And it's like, what the fuck are you like? That has nothing to do with this.
Man, my dad's and we have had our political sparring in the past, and we generally just don't talk about it too much anymore. But we were texting about it, and he was like, I told him, I was like, Biden really had to do one thing, and that was basically just push his policy talking points in a moderately coherent and just fine way. He didn't even have to respond to a single thing that Trump said.
Nope.
Literally could have ignored Trump completely and just talked about what he's done for Americans and respond to the questions that are being asked in a policy-driven manner.
Yep.
And he probably would have won this election.
Oh my God! Like it was his moment to win or lose, and in true Democratic fashion, like We're gonna bet it all on red. Let's just go for this. And he had that's all he could have ignored that Trump even existed there, especially with the mute feature that they had finally, which was great.
Yeah.
That did work at least.
A couple times it came up. A couple times. Not too much though.
Not too much, but I mean it was a nice thing because that's all he had to do was like, this is what we've gotten done. He should have went out there with basically a prepared speech. He didn't need to react to anything in real time.
You're telling me they didn't know the questions, or at least like the
Right.
range of questions ahead of time? Like, are you kidding me? I guarantee they knew at least like these are the 25 questions that we could ask, and we're gonna pull from this pool, like, or just like guess. Fucking ain't none of those questions were like curveballs out of nowhere. Those were like the most generic questions you would ask anybody at a bar. Be like, hey, do you think we should worry about childcare, affordability? And people at the bar would be like, yeah, I think that's probably a problem. And let's talk about it a little bit. Like, it's that fucking simple.
Oh, my
and he
God.
still couldn't respond. Oh my God, we beat Medicare. Mind fucking blown.
Nope, it was so bad. And then and it didn't help too. Biden honestly lost this before he ever went to the debate, because as soon as he passed that or signed that executive order on immigration, he handed them he's like, everything that they have been saying this entire time is right and accurate, and I've been wrong. That was literally, and it's not. He was trying to pander to some fucking pretend moderates that don't exist,
Right.
and threw away any ground he had to stand on the issue with that. And that was the one thing where Trump came through and he hammered that home. Like, Trump hit his 3 points. I mean, it wasn't very coherent, and Trump unraveled at the end. It was
the first half was like fairly coherent and responsive. I mean, he still didn't actually respond to
he didn't
most of the questions,
questions.
any of the questions directly or even moderately directly. But yeah, the second half was just complete incoherence on his side, which is what we knew we were going to see.
Right. Which is why the bar was so low for Biden. Too.
Yeah, exactly.
And it was rough. And then they start bickering about fucking golf. Like the most coherent debate part of it was
my handicap's an 8. Oh yeah, well my handicap was a 6, and I can swing and blah.
And
blah,
my
blah.
daddy could beat up your daddy at golf. I've said this to you, but like, it was the perfect opportunity. When Trump brought up golf, all Biden had to do would be like, yeah, your golf game's got to be way better than mine because I've actually spent my time in the White House working.
Right.
And that would have been a mic drop moment, just Def Jam, sunglasses, joint, walk off stage moment. And it's like, no, you seriously got into golf. Like, golf is what you got into. And it was like, because Trump spent more time golfing than any other president in history.
Yeah, by a large margin too.
It was a gift basket for an insult, and it was rough. And then Biden blue screening on like the second question.
Oh man, and then he like barely, he could barely respond to half of the questions. Like even just like a sentence. Like he would get halfway through it, lose track, and then try to talk about something else, and then he just would like mumble off a couple times.
Yeah.
It was like, how do you?
And he couldn't keep any of his numbers straight. He's like 24 billion, trillion, 100,000 million, and he's like, it's like you knew what he was trying to say, but it's just, I don't know. It was so disappointing because after his State of the Union speech, I was like, okay, I actually had a fairly high confidence, which was my problem. I knew that I was like, oh, he's probably actually going to do pretty good here.
Well, I don't think anybody knew just how badly it could be. Like, he hasn't been this bad ever. Like, sure, like he's been like weird about sitting, like doing physical things,
right?
What?
Because he's 147 years old.
Nobody gives a flying fuck if you're like not physically able like all the time.
Right. FDR was in a fucking wheelchair. He had to hobble out to the podium between two people. I mean, granted, he did try to cover up that he was in a wheelchair for most of his.
But whatever.
play.
Like exactly. So like we're not trying to say like that's unimportant, but it's not like
No.
even remotely close to what's actually important. But being able to speak coherently about your policies and
Yeah.
discuss them in a format
Mhm.
to the public
It's pretty important for being a president. And
important.
then, yeah, when your face is going to be on the screen the entire time, too, making it look like you're not going into screensaver mode. I don't know.
I was listening to so I watched the broadcast on Twitch through Hassan Piker's Twitch stream, and he was like, "Does he not know that he's like on the screen all the time? Because like he's on the screen all the fucking time, looking at fucking what is certainly looking at Trump, but it just looks like he's looking off in the middle of nowhere.
Right.
I don't know what his fucking camera angles were, like what the CNN's choice was, but they made him look like almost all the time that he was not looking at the moderators or at Trump when he was mostly looking at those two people. But from the angles, like it looked like he was staring off into fucking nothing.
Yeah.
And they didn't do that as much on Trump. I don't know if it was just because they like it seemed like for Trump they just always went to his straight on view.
Yeah.
And then
Well, and Trump just has like that default, like, minorly mentally challenged smile that kind of sits on his face. Like, I
Right.
mean, he always kind of looks like he's in La La Land too, but that's sort of his brand. Like he's thinking about lollipops and
yeah,
candy.
he sells it in the way that it's
Uh-huh.
like you can see that he's either like sort of following along
Mhm.
but not really paying attention, or just like clearly just like blocking
Mhm.
it out. Like that's
Mhm.
the way that it looks on his
Right.
face all the time.
Mhm.
So it doesn't really matter, what he's doing on the stage.
Yeah, we've got a live going, behind the scenes live for everybody listening, and somebody said that, I think they both did horrible, and they absolutely both did do
Yeah.
horrible. It's just the bar that we had set for Biden was slightly higher than we
Than the
did.
performance.
Right, like we expected Trump to do horrible, and Trump did do horrible. He lied. I mean, I don't know that he told you couldn't play two truths and a lie with him because there are two lies and a truth.
It would have been like fucking like 40 lies and 10 truths or something like that.
Did he tell? Did he like say his name or something? What truth did he say? I don't know. I mean,
There were just very minor moments when like his characterization of the issue was like mostly correct. It wasn't like a factual statement, but like his characterization of some issues were like actually, not
somewhat
grossly
accurate, yeah.
mischaracterized.
Mhm.
But like no, it was a very, very small percentage of everything that
Yeah.
he said that even had like a modicum of truth.
And I mean, the stuff that Biden did manage to get out was accurate, and honest, and like
I mean the thing that got out the most was the fucking Israel shit, and like them going back and forth and who's going to be the bigger
Right.
supporter of Israel committing genocide,
which was like great. This is also really the thing. This is where your coherence starts to
Right.
kick in,
It was-
and like
it was like the worst of every world. It was like,
Oh.
we're gonna support Biden's like we've been the biggest supporter of Israel and everything they're doing, and then Trump's like, you haven't done enough.
Yeah.
I was like, what the fuck are we watching right now? I
Like,
know
you're
that
basically a Palestinian terrorist, and like Jesus Christ. Yeah, I can't. I could not. The whole thing, and it was. I think it hurt more because again, I was watching with a group of DFLers.
Yeah, I was interested to see. Like, I asked you about like the feeling
Yeah.
of the room like once,
Mhm.
but like how obviously there were a couple of people that were like in the DFL,
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
literal-
no, it's the local DFL, but they're
Right.
all.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
one person who ran for governor was there.
Oh, sure.
But anyway, and she actually showed up a little bit late, so she's like, "Oh, I was listening to it on the radio and it sounded really bad, and it's better in person." And I'm like, "If it's worse on the radio, I don't even want to."
No, how can it be worse? on the
and she
radio?
kept like coming to me and asking kind of like what I was thinking about it and if I thought it was okay. And I'm like, no, nothing about this is okay. I mean, Biden definitely improved as time went on, and Trump unraveled more as time went on. Like they started off where Trump clearly was being more coherent, more engaged.
Presidential, you could say.
I wouldn't go
Well,
that far.
As far as his bar for presidential goes.
And then Biden just trailed off in the middle of a sentence at one point and just didn't say anything else. And like I was like, oh, that's rough. And then
they were like, okay, now we're gonna move on.
Yep.
They were like,
and then as it went further, Trump eventually started falling back into his incoherent rambling about nothing. And Biden started landing his planes on issues. It just took them a really long, turbulent landing, but they got there.
and they didn't really carry the same amount of information or impact that they would have if he.
Oh, and then every time they'd stop talking, they're like, "You've got 48 seconds left. Would you like to add anything else?" It's like, Jesus, talk till they tell you to shut up.
I mean, to be fair, that happened to Trump a couple times too.
Yeah, it did. It did. But either way, I mean, it looks bad when you run out of time on both sides.
No, absolutely.
And,
yeah. I can't imagine that 2 minutes is enough time, I think, for either of us to discuss any one topic that they brought up. Are you kidding me?
How
2
are you
minutes?
running out of time on these highly complex socioeconomic topics? Like, Jesus Christ.
It's so
God.
I don't get it. So it was bad. The whole thing was bad. I'm kind of glad I was able to watch it from home and just like not have to worry about other people around me, because I don't know that I would have been like
we had one Republican there too. One of the neighbors, he's a Republican, and they invited him. I mean, he was a good sport about everything. He wasn't like in your face, motherfuckers, or anything like that. But like,
you mean like just a regular person, you know, being like a kind of like normal person,
basically. But yeah, it definitely, because it wasn't even like it slowly deteriorated, you know. It wasn't like, oh, this is kind of going. It's like, oh, this is getting bad. It was just,
it felt like elder abuse the moment they started talking.
Yep. Man, we should have just had Mitch McConnell up there moderating. That would have been perfect.
Right. He can blank out for like 20, 30 seconds while, you know, Biden's also blanking out. They can blank out together, you know? Oh, man.
Yeah. So
I guess, fucking Biden. Does this, first of all, I just wanted to talk about like debating as a whole. Like, is it important as for a president? I would say absolutely.
Yes. I think it should be required that they do 2 or 3. I mean, we talked about this before, and I think that there should be, one kind of, once the presumptive nominees are,
which was this one basically,
right, and then one very close to the election. We kind of went back and forth on what we thought the right time frame would be. I thought, 2 to 3 weeks before the election. Maybe you thought maybe a little bit further out, but just something to respond to whatever current issues are right now. And for those mythical undecided voters that still are a thing, apparently.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think debating is like, it's kind of like comes to the core of being a politician, and that's who they are. They are politicians, and they should be able to not only defend their positions and defend their policies, but promote the issues that they're supposed to be there for.
Absolutely. And be able to stand up to criticism in live real time. I think that that's the most important, which honestly, I was a little upset with the moderators on this, because I do think it's a moderator's job to do a little bit of fact checking and pushback in real time for like blatant lies and stuff like that. And they did none of that.
Yeah, the only thing that they did, which I did appreciate, was that they continually asked Trump, like, this is the question.
Yeah.
Respond to this, please. And he still refused to answer that, even man, will he accept the election results? I love that. Like, the first time, just completely ignored the question. The second time they asked, they're like, I'll accept it if it's a free and fair election. It's like, okay, last time it was too, motherfucker.
No.
If it wasn't, you had 4 years to prove that, and you didn't.
Also, I hate that question. That should not even be a question. Will you accept the election results? It's like, it should be, it is a precedent. It is a required thing that, a peaceful transfer of power, you accept the election results, and it is unfit. Like, explain to me why you think that you are fit to try to run for office when you cannot abide by the simple rules of election. Like something framed in that sense of not, is it okay? Are you allowed to accept or not allowed to accept? You know,
Right.
it's up to you really if you choose if you want to be president or not, and if you accept that, you know, it's you can be whatever you want to be in your mind. And
Yeah, I agree. I think the framing of the question is not like if a journalist asked that question, you'd be like, why did you ask that question? That question has no like the response they're going to give is not going to give people more information about the person.
Yep.
You clearly they have not, so discuss that fucking thing that happened. Not like not go back to like day one question.
Yeah. No.
So I agree.
I
But
don't.
so I guess I do think that it's definitely important that a presidential candidate can debate.
They absolutely should. And because I do think that being able, because you can get up there, you know, in an uninterrupted platform when you're on the campaign trail, when you're making your commercials, when you're spewing your rhetoric, and you can say whatever you want, and you can frame it however you want and phrase it however you want.
Yeah.
But when those policies are actually brought up to you and you need to answer for them, you know, when it's like, oh, well, this is a criticism of this particular policy. This is what, you know, the budgetary office says is going to happen. If we enact this policy, how do you respond to that? Can you justify that? Can you explain to me why this won't happen when all of the experts say it will? That gives, you know, the American people the ability to be like, oh, okay, he doesn't actually know what the fuck he's talking about, or he does, you know,
Right.
and that sort of
Yeah.
situation. So yeah, I absolutely believe that that debates are paramount, but a important part of a debate is people need to form coherent sentences.
Yeah. Honestly, just like their answers too, when it was coherent, they were just like, I was the best and he was the worst over and over again. I was like, how about you throw some numbers out there? You know, novel idea. Why don't you talk about how things actually were? Give us a number so we can relate to that number and then say, this is the number now.
Yep.
It's not that fucking hard to consider that might be more powerful of a, you know, political thing than just saying I was better and he was worse. So vote for me.
He was the worst, and I was the best.
Right. Which they
I mean, but to be honest, you didn't want Biden throwing out any more numbers because he couldn't come up, and any
Well,
number that Trump
right.
throws out is like literally something he just made up on the spot. Like he did throw some numbers out there. I have no idea where he got them from.
Yeah.
They weren't accurate to anything that I could find because I was trying to fact check them in real time too. I'm like, what the fuck is he talking
Yeah,
about?
I mean, half the time I like almost didn't blame Biden for not being able to respond to Trump
Yeah.
because A, he jumped topics like 4 to 5 times every single 2-minute time block that he had, and then B, it was mostly incoherent or factually very incorrect statements. So it's like, how do you respond to that?
Which is why he shouldn't have been. He should have pretended like he was the only person on the stage,
Yeah.
and there was just an annoying sound he couldn't figure out
right.
what it was.
Choose one thing you hear and say your thing, and then moderately respond to that, and then just continue with what you want to do in your next term. I think that would have been a winning strategy.
That would have been a great strategy. Like I said, the bar was so low. So low.
It was really low.
And, you know, but he's old and his knees aren't that great. So I get stepping over it was difficult.
So I guess my point was like, I do feel like it is important, but when he's running the country, do I think his debating skills are like what's actually important? No,
I mean-
not really. I agree with everything we've said so far, but like in his last 4 years as a president, when's the last time that we were like, man, Joe Biden would be great if only he could debate better still?
Okay. So I'm going to say that debating comes with the ability to articulate your points, your accomplishments, and your projects, and that is something that the Biden administration has failed utterly, because they have been an incredibly successful administration on a number of fronts. And unless you are willing to go do like graduate level research to figure it out, it's hard to see all of those accomplishments, and it's hard to see what is the vision, what is his plan exactly for the second term. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I still
And
don't
I'm-
know like what major policy points that he's like gonna really focus on. Like last time it was he said immigration. He said, student loan forgiveness. He said healthcare. Did none of those three things I just listed?
No,
actually?
yeah,
he kind of did student loan forgiveness for fraudulent, whatever.
And
I'll
he
give him
tried.
half
I mean,
credit for that.
he did sort of try. He's like,
I'll
well,
give-
executive order, and they're like, and he's like, well, guys, I threw my pen and it bounced back.
He gave it the old college try.
Yeah. Oh, the dunce. But yeah, I think that's kind of where debating skills come in as being important for the because again, the president's a fucking figurehead. The president does very little. He puts a pen on paper. That's literally all he does. And he interacts with foreign leaders, and then he gets up on stage in front of a camera and says, the state of our union is strong. And we, Gorbachev, tear down this wall. And like, that's what they do. When you elect a president, it doesn't fucking matter who they are. If Donald Trump was Donald Trump, but it was Biden's cabinet underneath him, and he didn't get to pick Supreme Court justices, give a fuck less if he was president. Because he has very little ability to do anything. I mean, aside from signing laws and some executive order power, which is getting more and more as time goes on.
We're going to talk about.
but I mean, that's really a president's ability to effectively communicate and orate is huge. And then their policy
like the biggest thing that they actually do.
Yeah.
I agree. They very rarely get to actually affect policy decisions and policies that reach their desk even.
Right.
The stuff that he may wanted to do.
I mean, they come up with their platform, obviously, when they run, and then they put that to their party, and their party is supposed to get in lockstep and try to deliver that to their desk. And obviously, like, they do have influence, but the main influence is their cabinet, the bills that they are willing to sign, especially if it's not veto-proof, and then Supreme Court nominations.
Yeah.
But that's the core of their job function, aside from being that figurehead, that leader, that orator. And Obama was a great orator, great leader, and I think that a lot of Reagan is a great example. Reagan was a horrible fucking president.
Yeah.
Horrible fucking president.
Obviously.
But he had the ability to orate. He was a decent speaker, and that went a long way both while he was president and in deciding his legacy. It's the same with Obama, and I wouldn't call Obama a horrible president. I think he was a pretty decent president, especially in modern times considering. But I have a lot of criticisms of Obama. But a lot of people, in my comments I get all the time, I'd say Obama was one of the best presidents in our history. And I'm like, not even close.
No.
But it's that ability to put forth a effective communication that is an important part of a president. So I would say, debating skills are kind of important, obviously, in that situation.
Fair enough.
In my opinion. I think I've beat this one to death. I'm sorry.
So then the question is, based off that performance, should he be replaced on the Democratic ticket?
I'm struggling with this one a lot.
I agree.
A lot.
Obviously, replacing him at this time is really risky.
Yeah, because first of all, how does that look, right? Because we've gotten past the point where we're going to have a traditional nomination, a traditional primary.
We already had our quasi, primary that was not really a real primary.
No, because it's an incumbent. You never replace an incumbent. It is stupid to replace an incumbent in an election year.
We've also really
never had somebody who's 9,000 years old,
81 years old, running for president.
So I'm so on the fence about this because it's going to be messy. There's going to be a lot of people who are mad no matter what process we go through with it now, because Kamala Harris is not a good option.
No.
She's less popular than Biden is.
But she's the easiest option to pick. Easiest, if you're going to switch, she's the easiest person to switch to.
Right.
Does she have a better chance than Biden right now?
No.
I don't think so.
I mean, if you look at poll numbers, she doesn't.
Somehow Biden still has a better chance than Kamala Harris after that performance.
Well, and I mean, I hated Kamala Harris as a VP pick from the start. I thought she was a horrible option. I thought there was way better.
Like a little spotty record, honestly, as Attorney General for California. Like
absolutely,
and she kind of did some shady shit.
And then when you were running, in a very contentious time about, police brutality and law enforcement reform and all of that, and then
Right.
you pick California's top cop who
Right.
as your running mate for the progressive, for like the liberal ticket, the progressive ticket. The vice president is your chance to appeal to the fringe, right?
Yeah.
Unless you're Donald Trump and you are the fringe and you're trying to appeal to the moderates, then you go with Pence.
yeah,
but
you
like,
go the opposite direction,
Uh-huh.
and he just chose the same direction.
right. It's like, but it's a woman and she's kind of blackish, sort of, and so like
Yeah.
the checks all the boxes, and that was like there was tons of amazing minority candidates that I felt like were super qualified for that. Tammy Duckworth would have been, I think, a great option. You would have hit every checkmark box you could have wanted. But that's here nor there. I don't think that Kamala Harris is a
No,
viable option to replace.
I agree.
And I don't know how to go about it, but I do think that the DNC putting together something to replace him with would be an act of good faith, being like, hey, we hear you. We know that this is not a popular candidate. We're sorry we didn't go through the primary process and whatnot, but we're trying to provide you with a more palatable option to vote for. And I think that would go a long ways. I think that
I don't think they'll ever show that kind of humility. Though,
no, but I
so.
mean the act of doing it would.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It doesn't feel like there's an actual chance that's going to happen yet. Especially
there's just this emergency meeting of governors going on.
And
I don't know what that's about.
The White House governor meeting, that happens every year. So all the governors showing up, that's just regular governor meeting with the president.
There was one that
they did the same thing last year too.
Okay, I was
he
under the
is meeting with Democrat governors in private to discuss his candidacy, but
okay, I was under the impression that they held an emergency meeting recently.
I think the DNC probably has done something like. I don't know. I couldn't find anything about that specific meeting. I saw that you put it in.
And so honestly, I did not do nearly enough background checking on this. I got one of my mutuals posted a video about it earlier today, and I saw it, and then we were doing this, so I didn't really have time to background check it, so I just threw it in here because we were talking about this.
Yeah. Misinformation.
It could be. It very well could be. So I apologize if it's not an emergency. I was under the impression that they were having a meeting that the White House was not involved with.
No,
currently.
as of right now, he is meeting with all the governors on a regularly scheduled basis. But on that note, I did find a New York Times article that said that Biden has conferred with somebody close to him that he knows he may not be able to salvage his candidacy if he can't convince people that he actually, can do the job after the post-debate. And so, like, he doesn't feel like anybody's pushing him out, but apparently, according to people who he's talked to, he understands this is an uphill battle. But he does feel like this next week or two is going to be huge for him convincing people that he actually can do the oration and just be competent and appear competent. And to his credit, I think he has done a couple events, and I've watched not a ton of them, but I've watched clips, and there are clips of him speaking his normal kind of coherent level, which is like 90%. It's still difficult to hear him, but you can pretty much get it. Like closer to the State of the Union address since the debate. So I don't know what that means. I think time will tell. I think he probably bounces back.
I mean, I assume that no matter what, he's going to be the nominee. But
yeah, I just think it's too late, and just hopefully he can pull it together, I guess.
But there's definitely talk on the table about a replacement being an option. And so it would be if they do go through with that and decide, if Biden decides that he is not up to the task, he can't salvage the campaign, if the DNC says, hey, you done fucked up, Aaron, and we just can't continue to put our resources behind this for an effective victory, and we've already kind of talked about Kamala, and I don't think that would be a viable replacement.
She's not likable at all. I watched a bunch of stuff this last week, and there's a bunch of names being thrown out there. A couple of them here are one of them is Pete Buttigieg. He's just in the administration right now, so he's just
is.
kind of like a naturalish, and he was a presidential candidate in 2020.
And he is as corporate dem as they come, so I mean, they would love to throw him up there.
And so what I've heard is that in the primary process, the DNC sort of stacked the electors to choose the candidate in their corporate, like, institutionalized favor.
Right.
So they were very particular about who they actually selected as selectors, and they can, at the Democratic convention here coming up, they could choose a different candidate.
Oh yeah, the electors could go and pick anybody. There's no requirement for the electors to choose anybody other than who they want.
And it used to be the case, like in the 40s and 50s.
They nominated everybody, senator.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It was fucking weird back then too, but it could happen again. And so the word is that they have sort of handpicked selectors, and that if they do have to choose, that's probably where it'll be. That's probably when it'll happen, and it probably isn't going to be anybody moderately progressive.
No.
So like,
I can see Pete in that situation.
Yeah, I think Pete's probably one of the better choices.
Yeah. In this situation, now I would never vote for Pete in a primary, but in this situation, I would take.
Pete is a leap far and ahead, I think, of where Biden is right now.
Well, and he's young, he's charismatic. I mean,
and he's done a pretty good job at the labor or.
He's gotten a little bit more experience than just being Mayor Pete at this point, which is
what
helpful.
What is his official title? Secretary of Transportation.
Yeah,
and like I think he's done a pretty good job. Obviously, the whole train shit.
Yeah, that was
Norfolk Southern
not great.
and like the striking. I don't think he's been perfect, but
he hasn't been perfect. His bridge response though was pretty good, I feel like. And,
right. So I think he's done for the normies out there. I think he's done a pretty darn good job, and for moderate Democrats and independents,
for all of them.
Yeah, I think he's probably their best bet. Another one out there is Cory Booker, governor for New Jersey.
Yeah, Cory Booker would not be.
Yeah, he's fine. Like he seems like he is obviously
he's got name recognition, which helps.
Yeah, he is entrenched in the Democratic Party too. So like he,
again, we're not going to get AOC up there.
No, we're not going to get anybody like AOC. I have Bernie in here just because I have to talk about Bernie in a situation where we're talking about a Democratic nominee. He's
who
still
is equally as old.
He's older than Biden, but he's still way fucking better than Biden.
Oh my God, yeah.
He would absolutely, I think, beat Trump right now. No, with hands down, I think Bernie would win, even though he's older.
What somebody here in the live said with Pete, he'd never win the quote old-fashioned vote being gay, and I don't know. I kind of feel like we've moved past that at this point.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree. I don't think that is as much of a hindrance
as it used to be.
Yeah,
I would say 20 years ago, absolutely.
Yeah, even in 2020, I don't think that hindered him in his nomination.
No, I don't think so either. He
was just a bland cookie back then, a little bit.
And he had no experience. And he was doing that to build name recognition. He had no interest in being president.
And that's what he got. He got name recognition and a cabinet spot. Yeah.
That's exactly. All of that was planned. And I mean, and so obviously he's calculating enough, like he's got enough forethought to do the job. I wouldn't hate him. You got I don't know why.
Ooh, wow, fancy.
That was about.
So then another candidate person, I had not actually heard of him until I heard somebody talk about him. Wes Moore, governor of Maryland. He's just very pro-Biden Democrat and has done a seemingly decent job over there in Maryland. So just kind of another name to throw out there. Another big one, obviously, was thrown around during the primaries was Gavin Newsom. Again, I don't think a governor from California is the best choice for a Democratic ticket. I just don't think there's enough good things that are being said about California right now to make that.
I don't know. I mean, California has impressive numbers across the board, no matter how you look at it. Gavin Newsom knows how to bring those numbers hard to anybody who criticizes
I mean,
him.
he's definitely willing to debate. Like he debated Ron DeSantis,
Mhm.
and he
Which was
is.
such a weird thing to do. But
Yeah, I mean, governor versus governor. Like, I guess it makes
yeah, but
sense.
like they're not running against each other.
No,
There was no. It was a publicity stunt.
was
But
a
it was a good
publicity
one.
stunt,
I mean,
yeah.
like I appreciated it in a way, but
I mean, it showed that he was willing to put himself out there and go
Mhm.
on the attack a little bit, and sort of
Mhm.
kind of the opposite of what the Democrat strategy has
Yeah.
been. So, like,
No, I think Gavin Newsom has an excellent place. I don't think his place is president. I don't think it ever will be president.
yeah, we'll
But
see.
I do think that he has a place on the national stage.
Right. Yeah, just to me, he doesn't seem like the best candidate.
No.
If I was going to pick somebody, I think probably Buttigieg has a better chance.
Yeah,
than Newsom.
I'm still probably on that one too. Yeah, you put Katie Porter on here, which is an absolute. I mean,
Yeah.
I would love to see that, but that's an
Right.
absolute no go.
It was a like Hail Mary to sort of just putting her on the
Please,
list.
just give us a bone once in a while.
Like she's just an amazing progressive candidate and senator or
Mhm.
representative, and so like she would just be, and I think she would be a good president.
Yeah.
Legitimately, I think she
Mhm.
would.
Oh, I think she'd be an amazing president. I think that, and honestly, I think if she won the candidacy through a tried and true primary, she would actually have a decent chance.
Yeah.
I don't think that if they were just to hand her the position because Biden couldn't continue,
Yeah, no, you're
Um,
probably right.
and you know what, she's a 1-term or 2-term congressperson,
I think 2 term,
and then didn't win a Senate primary. You know, so
yeah,
that definitely would be a no go. I do think so. I do think
Then
our
you-
governor Tim
you threw your-
Walz.
you threw your ringer in there.
I did. I mean, just from a logical standpoint, from the DNC, he's the head of the Democratic Governors Association.
Okay.
He has a governor to presidency is a very logical step, very
Yeah.
historically logical
Right.
step.
Yep.
He has, the legislative history and legislative record to kind of back things up. I would hate to see him go as our governor, but I do think that it's not an outrageous. He's progressive, but not. He's still palatable to moderates.
Yeah, I would say so. I don't think Minnesota has really gained a reputation for being a progressive, like
No.
Eden.
It's not California,
no.
like we were
I
talking
mean,
about with the Gavin Newsom
we
problems.
think it's actually Minnesota's doing some ways a better job than
Mhm.
California.
Oh,
being
absolutely.
progressive.
I would agree.
But we don't have that reputation. I
Yeah.
guess.
We're still the Midwest, conservative Midwest in that sense. And
right.
so I mean, honestly, I think of everybody on this list, it would be I think Walz would be a contender for top 2 or 3.
He would be somebody from left field, but I understand what you're
Mhm.
saying, and I tend to agree. I think he
Mhm.
would probably do a decent job. So I guess
I think he'd have a better chance than Buttigieg if the people who feel. I mean, if it's true, and I tend to obviously be, but people in the comments here think that the gay thing is a bigger deal than I feel it is.
Okay.
And if that's the case, that would be a leg up in that sense.
yeah,
Obviously, a little bit of a
just
distraction. He's a little bit older.
the path for him
Mhm.
from where he is now to somehow getting on the ticket. I feel like that's also a convoluted path. Like with Katie Porter, like it just doesn't. I get that like the governor
Mhm.
jump makes sense, but doesn't he still have a few more years left on his term, or is this an election year for him too?
No, he's got a few more years left on his
That's what I
term,
thought.
yeah.
So he'd be leaving Minnesota, I guess.
Right, and the lieutenant governor would take over, appoint another lieutenant governor, and then they'd either hold a special election or it would ride out the
Sure,
rest of the term. I
sure.
guess I don't know exactly what the process would be there, but
Yeah, I don't dislike it. I like it.
Mhm.
But I think at the end of the day, what it comes down to is none of them have like the easiest pathway
No.
to replacing Biden.
I mean, of this list, I still think Buttigieg being in the cabinet currently makes the most sense.
I mean,
and
Kamala makes the most sense if they're looking for the easiest transition.
well, the
I
easiest
think.
transition,
But like we said,
again, if you're going to replace him, you got to be replacing him with somebody who has a higher chance of winning, and that's not Kamala.
well, unless he pulls out himself.
Mhm.
If he
I mean,
ultimately-
somebody here in the comments said, in my opinion, Harris would help energize the black and the young and black demographic, which is a must. And I wholeheartedly disagree with that statement. No offense to anybody who has that, and there's nothing saying that I'm right on this perception. But we were talking about this earlier that her history as a prosecutor is not exactly great for
She's been pretty pro institutionalized police
Yeah.
and policing laws, it seems, at least while
Yep.
she was in California.
and that's not a real popular view among youth voters, and it's definitely not a popular view among minority voters, obviously, because they're the
Well,
most disenfranchised by that system.
and she still carries the Biden talking points
Right.
of pro-Israel
Mhm.
and all this stuff. So, like, is she able to distance herself enough from Biden
Yeah.
to where the people who already didn't like Biden are now going to be for
Mhm.
her? I don't think so. And so
Yeah,
it's really
I don't
rough.
know.
There's really no like really great solution that I can think of.
No, and like I said, I think it's just going to be Biden anyway. But it's an interesting thought to think about. We are in unprecedented times.
Yes, in
As much
many
as I would
ways.
love some precedented times right
Right.
about now, a precedented week would be great. I'm sick of unprecedented.
And
But
speaking of precedents and unprecedented
oh
times,
my God,
the Supreme Court coming up with all these unprecedented rulings from fucking nowhere.
gonna
it
need to go
seems.
grab another fucking beer for this. Jesus
I know,
Christ.
right?
Yeah, no, the Supreme Court, and so especially Clarence Thomas, who I cannot wait
Human
to
scum,
Oh
essentially.
my God,
Like,
I cannot wait to see him, burning with a pineapple in his ass alongside, Hitler and Reagan down there and Kissinger, but he was so set on he's a constitutional originalist, right? Like, how did the founding fathers write this, and what did they mean? And that's what we need to go
Yeah.
by. And they're like, well, they wrote it as in you should be picking cotton, not or interpreting the Constitution. But we'll pick and choose. That's fine.
right, only 3/5 of you should be serving as Supreme
exactly.
Court, right? that's so bad, but it's like
it's true though. It's like
accurate.
it's like the fact that you can't understand that nuance, or I'm sure he does understand that nuance, and he chooses to ignore it.
Oh well, that's just the
Um,
black conservative way.
But the problem with that was that the entire premise where the Supreme Court draws its power, which is judicial review, which is what all of these overturns have come from.
Yep.
That's not written in the Constitution.
Mm-mm.
And everything that they're overturning this on, all of these on, is that it's not what the constitutional intent was. Like, Roe should be to the states, or abortion should be to the states, because they didn't explicitly write that in the Constitution. It's like, motherfucker, you were making these decisions with power that is not written in the Constitution. How can you justify that? But let's talk about these specific ones before I get into my rant and tirade here.
Yeah. So, do we want to talk about the big one first?
I'll let you take this one. I'm getting a headache from yelling.
Right. Well, okay. So I think let's work our way up. So one of they've done a bunch this year. It's been a really busy year for the Supreme Court. So
In the worst way possible.
in the worst way possible, literally all of these. You just look at any of their rulings. If it's split 5-4 or 6-3, you know it's going to be a bad ruling.
Yep.
And they have had some 9-0s and some very one-sided things, and you're like, yeah, nobody cares about those issues. Sure, why not? But then the ones you look and you're like, that's divided. It's really, really bad. So big one here is racial gerrymandering. So basically, the Supreme Court cleared the way for South Carolina to keep their new congressional map that had been deemed unconstitutional because it appeared to segregate black voters into areas where their votes would no longer matter.
Yep.
And therefore reducing the ability for black voters to be represented. Lower courts had said, they literally said this is the bleaching of African American voters.
That's a strong explanation
Right.
on that opinion.
And then the Supreme Court's like, actually, you can't do anything based on race, and so it's totally going to stand, and you can't decide if it's illegal based off race.
Yep.
So they're just like, we don't care if it's gerrymandered based off race because you can't decide things like that because of race. They just completely were like, we don't care about racism. You can gerrymander however the fuck you want.
And Clarence Uncle Thomas voted for it.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, he did.
I can't.
I don't
really
understand
can't.
where the constitutional originalism comes into play here, but
I mean, well, fair enough. They did have the 3/5 compromise in there, so maybe we are getting back to our roots.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. That always comes back. So they also did reverse the Trump ruling to ban bump stocks. I mean, I feel like they're cool. Bump stocks are like, it's like a toy thing, right? It's very like, as much as
gimmick.
As much as you think that guns are like cool and you should have them in, a lawful manner.
Yeah.
Like you could say like this was a really shitty rule, because you feel that you can handle guns and guns responsibly. Are they probably a bigger threat to, mass shootings than...
I mean, it was used in one mass shooting.
Right.
I don't know to the extent that it altered the outcome of that mass shooting, the effectiveness of it.
It didn't seem like it was a particularly deadly, like it was a larger mass shooting, but that's because there was literally thousands of people.
Right. I mean, it was a target-rich environment in that type. That's a horrible way to say it, but I mean that's true. It's like shooting fish in a barrel is about as literally as you're going to get.
That's true.
And he had multiple weapons, and there was a lot of problems with that go beyond a bump stock. I think the issue came with you can't do gun legislation via executive order because it is constitutionally protected. So that has to be done legislatively or through the ATF that makes up their own rules without that's a whole nother story. Well, but yeah, I don't know. I give zero fucks about bump stocks one way or the other. I think it was just
another one, minor one, certainly. Another seemingly minor one was the cross-state air pollution. Apparently there was some I don't know if it was an executive order or it's just an EPA rule via the Biden administration that it's called the Good Neighbor Plan, if you want to look it up, basically requiring factories in the West and Midwest states to ensure that they were cutting air pollution so that it didn't end up in the East Coast where there are less factories and more people.
Fair enough.
And they said that was unconstitutional.
You should be allowed to make your neighbors choke on your smoke as much as you want, the way God and the founding fathers intended.
They temporarily stopped that ruling. I don't know where it's going to end up, but they apparently they didn't care for that ruling. And then obviously the big one on homelessness and basically telling states that they can feel free to criminalize homelessness as much as they want, and just feel free to
make it illegal to make people homeless, which I mean
poverty.
They were basically already doing. And we recorded a podcast before this, but it'll probably get posted after this, where we go into homelessness, in depth and talk about that a little bit. And that's I mean, criminalizing homelessness is not new, but a Supreme Court precedent that says it's A-okay to just criminalize people for not being able to own or rent shelter is fucking insane.
Yeah, I mean, it's just it's another mark in the old this is what capitalism does sort of column thing, and we're supporting our capitalist oligarch interests instead of fucking helping people.
Somebody in the comments asked if any of these rulings have any kind of logic behind them that holds up, and well, it's the Supreme Court, so the logic absolutely holds up because whatever they decide to do holds up. They are the ones who get to supremely decide the law.
It really does come down to that. I mean, you've even seen how Supreme Courts have differently interpreted the Constitution. In the same kind of cases that come up over time. Like gay marriage for one, allowing black people to vote for one, segregation,
interracial marriage, segregation. So obviously abortion. There's a huge one. 50 years of precedent on that. 60 years of precedent.
Yeah. So some of these have like what you'd consider like constitutional merit, and then some of them are they're being activist judges, and we're gonna get to that even a little bit more so.
Yep.
So another big one, basically, I think almost as big as the immunity one, is the Chevron doctrine, Supreme Court ruling. So
I actually think Chevron's probably bigger than immunity.
I think it has wider impacts on the existence of our administration and just the ability for administrations to actually effectively govern the corporations and states, and just like do the things that the public wants them to do. It
was basically Chevron basically allowed agencies within the federal government, so like the EPA, the FAA, any agency that has the task.
FTC, this will impact a lot of areas.
Any agency that does anything, basically, especially when it comes to regulation within the federal government, was afforded by the Chevron ruling of 1984 the authority to do that with only very narrow limits of challenge, like legal challenges, because obviously every time an agency is going to put new restrictions on an industry or a business, they're going to want to challenge it because they don't want to be regulated.
Right. They don't want to have to take extra time and maybe a little bit extra money.
So it would tie up a ton of time prior to this, a ton of time in court when the EPA would try to impose new regulations. That's specifically what Chevron came about, new air pollution regulations, and the EPA was like basically like gave them a rule, I believe it was, that if you're going to build a new factory that's going to pollute X amount, you need to update your old factories to come in, so like your total pollution is under whatever amount. And Chevron was like, that wasn't the way the law is written. You can't regulate me that way. And the EPA is like, yeah, we can. And they're like, no, you can't. So they took it to court, and it made its way all the way up to the Supreme Court. And when they got there, the Supreme Court was like, yeah, the EPA is full of smart people that know what the hell they're doing, and you need to listen to them because they have the authority to regulate these problems and these issues.
Right.
And so that's been the precedent, right? Like they can regulate, and a lot of these things still can be challenged in court if it's too far out of the realm of their jurisdiction or whatnot.
Yeah, it's not like they were never obviously lawsuits from about that. So
so like it still didn't give them absolute authority, like they can go do whatever the hell they want. It just freed up resources on both the judicial system and the federal agencies to do what they are supposed to do,
right.
Get their
effectively, do the things that they're mandated to do as an agency of the federal government.
Enforce the laws that Congress wrote. And I noticed, because I did a video on this, and I've had some people who are desperately trying to defend this ruling because there's people on the internet who look directly into the sun sometimes.
A right-wing wet dream right now.
So one of the arguments was, well, Congress needs to write more specific laws, because that's the thing, is if it's outside of the specific wording of the law, this is where that nuanced and gray area comes in. It's like, well, how first of all, we have high school dropouts who failed their GED in Congress.
Well, and we have very smart people too.
Oh yeah,
and they are smart at doing things like deciding what should be a law and how to do, like, phrasing it so that it can actually effectively do things.
Right.
You know what they're not experts at? Defining the gray areas of the law that say this is how much pollution you should allow.
Yeah.
This is how much CO2 you should be producing.
How many parts per million of sulfur can be allowed before we get acid rain and asthma? Like, they're not scientists, and that's why you have teams of people. And honestly, if you had to legislate each one of those things individually, like, they can't pass their own fucking budget just to keep their government running.
Yeah,
the thing
nowadays they can't do anything, basically.
So the idea that Congress just needs to write specific laws and we don't need the agencies to have the authority to enforce those laws is fucking ridiculous.
Well, also, if some of those scientific standards change and like how much pollution we know we can actually handle, or how many, like, what's the microplastics levels that's allowable, blah blah blah, all this millions and tons of different areas that can change. does that mean that Congress has to approve every single fucking change that happens?
Yeah, or write a new law for
Right.
every change.
That's fucking ridiculous.
So, I mean, there's no reasonable argument that this was an okay decision.
No.
And this is going to have such wide-reaching because in a lot of these cases, these agencies will try to impose. Like, think about Boeing right now.
Yeah.
And what if the FAA is like, you need to ground this via this new regulation until all of these things are checked and pass the security check?
Right.
And,
Or under current regulations that they are like, if a plane's not safe, you can't fucking fly it.
Yeah.
That's probably a law.
Yeah.
And then the FAA is like, yeah, you see that thing that's happening with the door? That's not safe.
Yeah.
And Boeing's like, says who?
Yeah.
You? Fuck you.
Congress didn't write a law about it.
Yeah.
Okay. And
did
then
they specify that doors have to be
doors have to remain on the airplane at all time. I don't see anywhere in this entire law where it says the doors have to remain on the plane at all times.
That's exactly fucking right. That's literally what can happen now.
And then they'll take it to court, and it will take years to get
Yeah.
through because the judge will be like, "Yeah, you dumbass, the door absolutely has to stay on the fucking plane." And they're
But it's
like,
going to take months and months for it to get to that fucking
right.
judge.
But then they're going to be like, you know what? I want to appeal this because I think
Right.
that was wrong. And maybe a different judge will tell us that the doors don't have to stay on the plane all the time. And they will drag it. And it'll probably, in a lot of these cases, still get ruled in the favor of the agency.
Right.
But
But
it
it's
will
gonna
be
take-
years of doors falling
Yeah,
off airplanes and
right.
shit in the process. It's just, it's
Exactly.
fucking insane.
And clearly Boeing and other companies, like when they do shit like that, that's less visible. Even when it is highly visible, Boeing still didn't give a flying fuck.
No.
But when it's very much less visible like that, there's no way that we're going to see the amount of impact that our current administration ability is. It's
No.
a
this is-
disaster.
It is an absolute disaster. And you think about, because all of our, especially when it comes to like environmental protection, this is built on decades of, the Cuyahoga River in Ohio being set on fire and like
multiple times.
DuPont lacing their cigarettes with Teflon to see what would happen to their and then just dumping all of that shit into the water. And like
Right.
all of this, it's built on regulations are written in blood, right? They're
Right.
always written in blood.
Absolutely.
And this just undoes all of that. Because you have to fight tooth and nail
yeah.
to get every single one of
Right.
them.
Do you think that OSHA just arbitrarily decided about
Woke up one day and they're like, we're gonna do OSHA and like kids
Nah.
can't work anymore.
fucking
and-
people were dying, get their limbs chopped off, and just from trying to live their fucking life at a job. And
Yeah.
so this is bad. It's really bad. So Justice Kagan summarized her dissent, basically saying that courts, in particular this court, will now play a commanding role in setting national policy, which is like, why the fuck is a court system determining policy?
And that's literally not their job. We have a legislative branch specifically for policy. Like
Yes.
that's their job.
Yes.
And you have a judicial branch specifically for just interpreting law, and that's solely their job.
Yeah, which they're definitely not doing, especially with something like this coming up.
No.
So basically, it's become part of the warp and woof of modern government, supporting regulatory efforts of all kinds, to name a few. Keeping air and water clean, food and drugs safe, and financial markets honest are some of the ways that this is going to affect us. So, if you take away anything from this, just know that
You have to read The Jungle in school. That's what we're going back to, basically.
we are going back to a laissez-faire bullshit era of lack of
where your
regulatory.
pigs have tuberculosis and you end up with fingers in your canned meat because it got
and we
sliced
already
off on
had
the factory
so
floor.
many issues with our food being causing people to get sick and salmonella and fucking all this shit. Like, we already have not been doing it like the best job. This is just gonna make it worse.
No, like, yeah, it's not great. And they're like, you know what? Good enough. Let's just go back to the way we used to do things when people died at 30. That sounds great.
Exactly. So I guess then the big elephant in the room,
Yeah.
presidential immunity.
Yep. I mean, honestly, okay, so I know that this has been a big thing all over the internet, and people are freaking out, and people are saying that, it's King Joe Biden now, and it'll be King Trump. And this is honestly exactly the ruling that I expected the Supreme Court to give on this one. And I don't really think it is as crazy as people think it is. It was a gift basket to Donald Trump. Them even agreeing to take the case was a gift basket to Donald Trump. This should have never made it to the Supreme Court. This should have stayed in lower courts.
Even like the Supreme, it it was part of Trump's strategy to just
Mhm.
like delay any
Mhm.
proceedings before the election.
Yep. So that's all they're doing, because all this does is say that the president has immunity while conducting official duties, and that was pretty much the constitutional interpretation from the start, right? Like, you obviously you can't be charged with murder for ordering a military attack,
Or a drone strike.
right? It's something like that, because then you can do your job as president in that situation. But if we went and did a random drone strike, we would go to prison for murder. That's kind of the idea of a president does have a certain amount of immunity when doing their job, officially doing their job.
Which, to be fair, I think the way that they did that
Mm-hmm.
already was pretty fair and pretty well thought out.
Yeah.
So by changing in this way, I think
Well,
it
what do
is,
you mean changing in this way? Because they already said that
they're shifting the burden of proof from the criminality aspect to whether or not it can even be
fair point.
discovered. So
Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things this does, not only does it legitimize many things that a president can do in official aspects,
Mm-hmm.
and then not even be regarded with any criminal discussion, by placing the burden of a prosecutor to determine with the court whether or not their actions were even remotely related to their presidential duties.
Yeah.
I think you're shifting the burden of evidence in a way that creates more obscurity and more uncertainty.
I think that's a fair statement.
For prosecutors.
I do. I try to think about like Iran Contra in this situation.
Right.
And but obviously nothing came out of that.
Right,
You
yeah.
know, but in that situation, was the president acting officially even though he was acting outside of Congress, and where does that come from? But then again, in that situation, it would also have had to have been an impeachable offense that was impeached, removed, and then you could be criminally tried, I think.
I think that's how it goes. And so, especially when what they have basically said, I think, from what I've heard, is that they've stated that Trump's, January 6th speech protected.
Yeah, see, and I don't understand how that's official, because that would be campaign. But that's where so they're saying for the lower court needs to decide whether it's official or not. So they just punted the whole thing.
They punted the whole thing, and instead of setting any guidelines, because what they don't do, I guess, is set guidelines for something like this. That's just not what their court does. They rely on the lower courts to set the guidelines, and then they determine if those guidelines are constitutional or not. Blah blah blah. But they've basically just muddied the water for everything a president does, and it gives a lot of leeway to a president to now say, this is an official act of my presidency.
Right.
And it's up to a court to arbitrarily, there's no
decide, right? And a prosecutor to argue that it is or is not.
Yeah, what sort of framework do they have to base that off of?
And I don't really think
is it purely just like, this is a private citizen act, and this is like you moderately, kind of working as a president? Like, if he steals $20 from a pizzeria that he's eating pizza at, is that a presidential, like, he's the president there. If he says, I need this $20 as the president,
right?
I don't know what you mean. Like, that's a really dumb scenario.
Yeah, but I mean, it's all, again, unprecedented, because we've never criminally prosecuted a president in our history. This is the first, and so now it's we didn't have this framework or these standards before.
This is a completely new set of standards that are being imposed upon the court system.
Yeah,
I don't think it's that hyperbolic. I don't think it's that much I don't think it's that hyperbolic to say that this could lead to the further degradation of our democracy and potentially to our worst fears of
the fact that this reached the Supreme Court at all has already led to the further degradation. I mean, the fact that we have a president that is being criminally tried, and there's a question, one way or the other, that like, should he be tried or not at this point is ridiculous. And the fact that it's gotten to that point, I mean,
Well, right. So that's the question now.
mhm,
Instead of debating, whether or not him calling the Secretary of State or whatever in
mhm,
Georgia and asking him to find more votes, instead of determining if that like is fucking illegal
mhm,
for him to just ask him to generate more votes somehow,
right,
um, now we have to decide if him calling is
was
a
an official
presidential
act,
official
yeah,
act, or
mhm,
if it was even partially as his duty as president to call elective
yeah,
about a election. You could
mhm,
argue that certainly that like it's his right as a president to check in with any state election official and be like,
yeah.
hey, how is this being fair? And I think in order to be fair, you should find more votes for me. I don't.
I it's
I'm
I
just saying
no,
it creates a
it's not out of the realm of possibility. The arguments you're making are valid. I don't think what I'm saying is I don't think the Supreme Court decision changed anything with this in regards to it set a precedent. It set a precedent of this is now the process, but I think that was already something that they were going to have to argue in court as it was because that was already the way that it was written is there's a official act immunity and then it's
well. So the way that I saw it was the way it was
Mhm.
before is that if if the prosecutor believes that a president or ex-president
Mhm.
had broken a law, then they could charge them because
Mhm.
on the basis of that case of breaking a law
Yeah.
and whether or not you know a president is not above the law, right? That's
Right.
the whole point. And you
Mhm.
can then charge them based off the criminality of said act.
Mhm.
It didn't matter if in the
Well, and they
case,
should be I get what you're saying. And then they should be arguing the immunity part in the defense
yes,
of that criminal proceeding.
yes,
Yep. No, I
exactly.
get what you're
And
saying.
you're no longer allowing that to happen in that way.
Now you're adding 2 to 5 more steps in front of even getting to that
Exactly.
point.
You're creating extra hurdles. And what I think what will end up being the most profound difference and biggest
Mhm.
change is not in the way that this procedurally is going to affect things,
Uh-huh.
but it's just going to give more perceived power and perceived leeway for presidents to somehow make themselves act in more presidential manners while
Mhm.
pursuing their own political goals
Right.
and somehow just sort of shift the narrative, and everything that they do is now a presidential duty, and it creates I think a precedent where presidents will do more and more whatever the fuck they want and fuck all the consequences. I mean, if Trump isn't going to get any consequences for October or January 6th,
Yeah.
um, for clearly inciting an
Yeah.
insurrection, like if you're arguing me today that he didn't play a huge fucking
A
role,
pivotal, foundational
for
role.
those people being there in the fucking first place. You
Yep.
could have held that rally anywhere in the fucking country,
And
but
on any
holding
other
it
day.
on any other day, but that specific day and that specific fucking place, and
Mhm.
saying what he said to those people, and you're telling me that he doesn't have probably the biggest hand in what occurred, then
Mhm.
you're fucking insane. You are on the MAGA train down to fucking hell.
Yeah.
Like, not hell, because I don't believe hell's a real fucking place, but like you're on that. You're no longer living in reality.
Mhm. No, it's absolutely true. And yeah, and then obviously like calling Georgia and being like I need you to find me votes is a very blatant crime. Like I don't feel like there's any
I don't
it
know.
was a perfect phone call, but a very blatant crime. And I don't no, you have a point. You do have a point. I don't know.
And I think this was unnecessary. It was
Oh, it was
completely
completely
unnecessary.
They didn't need to take the case at all. They should have said we're not going to hear
Well,
it.
and the fact that there are legitimate questions about specific things that they could have discussed,
Mhm.
that they just completely ignored those cases, and we're just gonna bring up fucking random shit, and
Yep.
we're not gonna talk about things that have actually occurred, and then extrapolate that into how we're going to interpret this
Mhm.
new precedent. They're just like, we're just going to make it up because there's a perceived possible way that a presidency's administration could be corrupt, that
Mhm.
a judge could be corrupt, that a grand jury could be
Mhm.
corrupt, a prosecutor could be corrupt, and because of that perceived potential corruption, now no longer can you just sue a president. Now you have to jump through these hoops first.
Yeah.
If you listen to any podcast that actually has a professional lawyer or ex-judge, they will tell you that this is a will cause huge damage to our democracy.
I mean, I believe it. I guess I was expecting this to be the ruling that the Supreme Court came forth with, so I wasn't overly surprised when it came out. And from just an overarching legal standpoint, I didn't feel like they said anything that hadn't been that wasn't already the understanding. But the procedural part of it, which I hadn't thought extensively about beyond just the implications of Trump going to court, before or after the election.
Well, right, yeah, that on the face of it is like a huge, like, I don't know why they don't wait to rule on this until after the election. Why do they have to do their thing first?
Yeah.
That's going to basically push everything else back. They had to know that this was going to be the effect.
Yep.
So the Supreme Court is now effectively campaigning
for
Donald Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I don't understand how you could take it any other way than that.
No, you can't. I mean, you genuinely cannot.
Not that they haven't already been fucking campaigning for the Republican Party, like and active, being activists for any Republican Party wet dream wish that they, came up with that the fucking Federalist Society decided they wanted to do, but we're fucking fucked. I'm sorry. Like,
I don't know. This is so. I mean, to reiterate, what we're gonna keep saying, and we're gonna keep saying it through November, and you're gonna get so fucking sick of us saying it. Is I don't give a shit if you like Biden. I'm not asking you to vote for Biden. I'm asking you to vote for whoever the fuck may possibly replace Clarence Thomas, Alito, possibly Roberts in the next 4 years. Like, that's because if Trump gets reelected, they will be replaced no matter what. They're either going to not retire, and then we'll just be doing this all over again in 4 years, or Trump's going to get reelected, and they will retire, and they will be replaced with some 14-year-old fucking lunatic.
Well, or another Brett Kavanaugh, Amy Coney Barrett. There's in their 40s and 50s, and then they got another 30.
But that's my point. Like, somebody young that is, extreme, like, handpicked out of the Handmaid's Tale type bullshit. And
honestly, man, it feels like we are literally, like, if they made a prequel to the Handmaid's Tale, this is the timeline that they would have scripted.
Yep.
I swear to God, I don't think I could possibly, like, even imagine a way that this more appears to be heading that direction.
No, you can't. You can't. They keep consolidating executive power. They keep pandering to extreme right Christian nationalists.
Yeah.
It's absolutely the way it feels like it's going, and it will go that way very quickly because that would cement the Supreme Court's far right, conservative, extremist right, fascist majority.
Yeah, I mean,
for the next 3 to 5 decades.
Alito and Thomas are already right there, so like, I'm sure they could find somebody to replace them, no problem. But
what I'm saying is there's an end, there's a light at the end of the tunnel for those two because they're old. Yeah,
they're a little old.
I mean, Clarence is 76 or 78. I mean, he's up there.
Yeah.
Another 4 years, he's going to be 80.
Right.
A lot can happen to people at that age. And whether he makes it through the next election or not, we're not looking at him for probably even another 10 years.
No, probably not.
Alito's getting up there too. Roberts is still, and whatever. I mean,
but yeah, no, I hear what you're saying. At this point, as much as it pains me to say it, I don't give a fuck about what happened at the debate.
No.
The past 4 years, if what happened, if debates won elections, then Hillary would be our president.
Oh yeah, no, and I read that according to the polls, the debate had absolutely no effect on anything. I
don't think it swayed any fucking undecided people either. I think it was literally a waste of fucking time. So I'll fucking vote for Biden's head in a fucking jar like Richard Nixon in Futurama.
Yes, absolutely.
Over Trump right now. I don't think there's any there's no conversation to be had about it. There
Absolutely
isn't.
not.
It is.
Like I said,
If you're for democracy or you're for fascism, and one of the side is not even that far away from the fascism, it's just less fascism.
yeah. Well, it's like Weekend at Bernie's was not that bad of a movie, and like I
Right.
perfectly fine with that. Like I will watch Weekend at Bernie's reruns for the next 4 years.
If the policy of Biden is going to continue this next 4 years of what the previous 4 years,
he's got a solid cabinet underneath him. I am completely confident. If they, just put some makeup on him so he didn't look like he was decaying and like propped him up in his chair and
yeah.
put a hologram of him up. I don't give a shit.
Like,
He's got a solid cabinet underneath him, and
Right. We're not saying that this is our preferred
No.
fucking option.
I'm
we very much would absolutely prefer somebody like Bernie or literally any progressive candidate that has ever existed, dead or not at this point. Like just use an AI like to read everything they ever wrote down and then have that AI be the president.
Yeah.
Like Eugene Debs AI, done. Voting, you got my vote. I don't fucking care. Like this is not good by any stretch of the word. But
anything that Trump is going to put in for policy or specifically in the White House is going to be disastrous. And then you're also voting for cabinets that either at least make the agencies sort of function or actively trying to destroy them, like DeVos and DeJoy. We need to stop putting D's in there, I guess.
Right.
But like, I mean, DeJoy is ruining the post office. Betsy DeVos was ruining the Department of Education, like actively set out to destroy these agencies. Be like, look, these programs don't work, and I am going to put a stick of dynamite in the middle of them to prove it. And that's...
If anything, just for anybody that's listening and watching on TikTok, just think of net neutrality.
Yeah.
Biden re-implemented net neutrality that Trump had taken away.
Yep.
So if you care about your internet access and your ability to stream, networks, if at some point our networks became so congested, or that companies were willing to actually, basically cut down on internet speeds and raise prices and whatever, or just truncate your ability to gain access to high-speed internet, Trump's not going to fight you on that.
Nope.
So, like, just if that's nothing else, if you're on this platform and you're just like, yeah, like, I like internet access and high-speed internet for a reasonable price, what the fuck would you be voting for Trump for?
Yeah, it's really a no-brainer. And like I said, at this point, I give zero fucks about Biden, and I give zero fucks about Trump. I give massive fucks about who they are going to install in positions of power
the whole
that
Project
affect my
2020
life personally.
Yeah, the whole Project 2025 and replacing, the way that the administration and agencies determine what's a career politician or a career agency worker versus a presidential appointee. What do they call it? Class F, Schedule F, whatever it's fucking called. That alone is fucking crazy and weird and shitty.
Yeah.
So like, there's you can't not vote for Biden at this point. I'm sorry, and I it pains me.
I hate to say
and
it.
we
I hate
all
to
the
say it.
fucking
I
time.
hate to be that guy. I really do. But
And we cringe at all the fucking DFL people that are like, you just think about all the other stuff that Biden's done and blah blah blah.
I do. I get in arguments with them all the time behind the scenes. I literally tell them that they are the fucking problem. But this is the reality of our current situation.
Honestly,
and,
if they have the Supreme Court right now, if they get the presidency and one of the two houses of Congress. I don't see them ever giving up that control.
No, that will probably be the last election.
The last real election.
Last real election. We'll get some Putin-style elections.
Probably.
Those are great. But
it's
anyway.
my presidential duty to make sure the votes are in my favor.
Yep. If people are not voting for me, that's not fair. So that's not a free and fair election.
It's my presidential duty to make sure that it's fair for me.
Yeah, 100%. And people not voting for me isn't fair. So they need to be disfenestrated.
Yeah. Well,
I think we've killed this one. I am exhausted.
I'm ready to drink another beer and just pretend like my problems don't exist.
The bar is going to make a lot of money off of me tonight after this. Yep. All right. Somebody said I nominate Hunter. Both candidates will be felons who don't pay taxes and like shady business deals.
Yeah, fair enough.
I mean, why not at this point? Can't
Right.
beat them, join them, right? All right, guys. Well, once again, thank you so much for tuning in this week, and and every week. The only reason we do this is because you guys sit here and listen to us ramble on, and we hope we make it worth your time. Obviously, we spend money doing this. It costs us money to do
Sure
this.
do.
So if you support us in any way financially, thank you so much from the bottom area of our hearts. If you're looking to do that, Venmo, PayPal is on the top of our social medias, at least TikTok it is.
Yep. And then we've got Patreon memberships. We've got YouTube memberships. If you just want to kind of give us some support via just money that way, we're working on perks for that.
Yep.
Once we get a few more people, I don't know. We're gonna try to do some private shows or have you on the podcast at some
We might
point
do
for
some live Q&As for people who subscribe and stuff. That's kind of what we're working on.
Yeah.
And then yeah, we got merch offjoewagon.com. You can buy my merch, you can buy Let Them Eat Toast merch. No matter what, the support, the biggest support is always watching, listening,
Sharing,
tuning in, sharing,
commenting. Let us know what you want to hear about.
Yeah, interacting. Yeah, and you guys give us ideas. We're doing this for you, so let us know what you want us to talk about, and we'll do our best to oblige. Again, love all of you guys for giving us the opportunity to do this, and we will see you next week.
That's right. Thanks for tuning in.